Picture a city that feeds 500,000 people every single day. Now picture what happens to the food those 500,000 people don't finish. The scraps, the bones, the fat that goes rancid in a week, the bread that goes green at the edges by Thursday, the meat that was questionable on Monday and is now, by Saturday, something you can smell from 2 streets away. Picture all of that. Every rind, every carcass, every bucket of drippings, every fish head, every vegetable that missed its moment by 3 days, every chicken that died before it was supposed to, every egg that someone cracked open and quickly decided not to think about. Now picture the people who look at all of that and see not garbage, but dinner. This is a story about hunger, not the kind of hunger you feel at 11 o'clock when lunch seems a long way off. I mean the kind of hunger that sits behind your eyes in the morning, that makes your hands shake by midday, that teaches your body to be grateful for things that would make a well-fed person gag. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know whether you're listening to fall asleep or because you're one of those people who finds the 18th century fascinating, which honestly is a very specific kind of person to be, and I respect it completely. Either way, get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Because tonight, we're going somewhere most history books skip right past. We're going into the kitchen of a woman who has 4 children to feed and about 6pence to do it with. And we are going to follow every single decision she makes. Here we go. London in 1751 is the largest city in the Western world. Something like 650,000 people packed into streets that were built for maybe a third of that number. The River Thames runs through the middle of it all, grey and cold and thick with the waste of everyone who lives on its banks. The smoke from 100,000 coal fires hangs over the rooftops in a permanent haze that turns sunsets and extraordinary poisonous orange. It is a city of extraordinary wealth and extraordinary misery, and the gap between the two is not measured in miles. Sometimes it's measured in a single street. On one side, a merchant's house with a proper kitchen, a cook, a scullery maid, a pantry stocked with cheese and preserved meats and a barrel of decent wine. On the other side, a tenement where 6 families share a building that was designed for 1, where the roof leaks directly onto the bed you share with your 2 younger siblings, where the fireplace smokes so badly that lighting it in the morning means spending the first hour with your eyes streaming. You live on the other side. Your name is Agnes Morrow. You are 14 years old. You've lived your entire life in the parish of St. Giles, which is, if you want to be precise about it, the most overcrowded, most dangerous, most chronically hungry neighbourhood in the entire city of London, possibly in the entire country, possibly in the world, though you have no way of knowing that. You've never been farther than Cheapside. The parish of St. Giles sits just northwest of Covent Garden, close enough to the markets that you can walk there in 20 minutes, far enough from any kind of prosperity that it might as well be a different continent. The streets are narrow and dark even at midday, because the buildings lean toward each other overhead, their upper stories jutting out so far that in some alleys you can shake hand with the person in the window across from you without either of you leaving your room. The ground is always wet. There are open sewers running along the edges of most streets, carrying everything the neighbourhood doesn't want directly into the river. In summer the smell is, well, you know what it is. You've lived with it your whole life. It doesn't register as extraordinary to you anymore. It just registers as home. The air in St. Giles smells like coal smoke, wet wool, animal dung, human dung, Fermenting grain from the gin distillery 2 streets over, rotting wood, unwashed bodies, tallow candles, and underneath all of it, like a low note you can't quite stop hearing, the smell of old food. Not fresh food, not cooking food, old food. Food that has seen better days. Food that is negotiating with you. Food that is saying, I am still here. I am still capable of feeding someone. But you're going to have to work for it. This story is about that negotiation. The morning begins before the light does. You open your eyes to darkness so complete that for a moment you can't tell if you're awake or still dreaming. Your body knows, though. Your body's already making its inventory before your mind catches up. Cold. The fire went out sometime in the night. You can tell because the room is the specific cold of unheated air in October, the kind that settles into your joints and makes your knuckles stiff. The blanket over you is thin. It was thin when your mother got it from the rag seller 3 years ago. It is thinner now, washed so many times that you can almost see light through it. Tommy is pressed against your left side, his small body radiating the extraordinary heat that children give off when they sleep. Nell is curled behind your knees. She makes a tiny sound in her sleep, a soft exhale that sounds almost like a word. Your mother is already up. You can hear her moving in the room below, the particular rhythm of her, the way she sets her feet down carefully on the creaking boards to avoid the worst ones, the soft clatter of the iron pot being moved toward the hearth, the sound of her breath in the cold. She has been up since before you woke. She is always up before you. In the 12 months you've been old enough to notice this properly, you have never once beaten her to morning. You ease yourself out from between the children without waking them. The floor is ice under your bare feet. You find your stockings by feel. They were on the floor, exactly where you left them, and pull them on, and then the dress you wore yesterday and the day before that, and the shawl that used to be your grandmother's, which is the warmest thing you own. Then you stand in the dark for a moment and listen to your stomach. It says nothing particularly alarming. This is a good sign. Yesterday it was saying quite a lot, none of it polite. You ate last night. Not much, but something. A bowl of boiled oats with a scraping of dripping. Bread that was 2 days old, but edible if you didn't look at the bottom edge. That had been supper for all 4 of you. Tommy had wanted more. Nell had wanted more. You had divided what was left in the pot into 4 equal portions and watched your mother take her own portion and quietly tip about 1/3 of it back. She always does this. She has a system for it. She makes it look accidental. She pretends to have misjudged the portion, or she pretends she's not hungry, or she turns away to check on something, and when she comes back her bowl is mysteriously a little lighter. You've known about this system for at least 2 years. You've never said anything. You're not sure what you would say. Down the stairs now, carefully. 3rd step from the bottom likes to shriek if you put your weight on the left side. And into the main room. Your mother is crouched in front of the fireplace. The fire is just catching, the tinder she's been nursing for the past 10 minutes finally giving up its reluctance and blooming into something real. Her face is lit orange by it. She's 32 years old and looks, in this light, like something ancient, like someone who's been doing this, crouching over fires in cold rooms before dawn for centuries. "Morning," she says without turning round. "Morning, Ma." She holds her hands toward the flame. Her fingers are cracked at the knuckles. They have been cracked since you can remember. In winter they bleed sometimes. I need you to go to Drury Lane today, she says. The market, end of the day when they're packing up. See what Jensen's got left. You nod. You know what this means. End of the day at Jensen's, and at every other food stall in the market, means the things that didn't sell. The things that are still technically available for purchase, but that the morning buyers, the ones with real money, the ones who had choices, looked at and passed over. End of the day means what's left. And what's left is what you build a life around. Here is something they don't teach you anywhere in 1751, in any school, in any book, in any church sermon. There is an entire science to feeding a poor family. It is not written down. It is passed from mother to daughter, from old woman to young, through demonstration and correction, and the occasional sharp word when you do something wrong. It lives in kitchens that are barely kitchens. Rooms with one pot and a smoky hearth and a shelf with perhaps 6 items on it. It lives in the hands of women, like your mother, who know things about food that no cook in a wealthy house has ever needed to learn. Because a wealthy cook can afford to throw things away. You cannot. The woman who taught your mother most of what she knows is old Sarah, who lives in the room directly below yours, who is approximately 60 years old, though she claims to have lost count somewhere around 50, and who has been feeding herself and various grandchildren in St. Giles for as long as anyone can remember. She's small and bent and moves with a kind of deliberate slowness that suggests her joints have been conducting their own private protests for years. But her eyes are sharp, and she doesn't miss a thing. Old Sarah has opinions about food the way other people have opinions about God. Strongly held, deeply informed, non-negotiable. She came up behind you last week when you were standing in the shared courtyard, holding a piece of mutton that you had found near the back of a cook shop on St. Giles High Street. The cook shop owner had set it out in the alley, which in St. Giles is a kind of informal communication. I am done with this thing. Someone else may have it. You'd wrapped it in your apron and carried it home, feeling pleased with yourself. Old Sarah looked at it over your shoulder. Smell it, she said. You smelled it. It smelled like, well, it smelled like mutton that had been sitting in a warm kitchen for a while, which is to say, it smelled noticeable. Sharp or sour, she asked. Sharp, I think. Sharp's different from sour. Sharp means acids. Sour means rot. She took it from your hands and held it to her nose with the confidence of someone who has been making this assessment for 40 years. Sharp with a little sweet underneath? How long you reckon it's been sitting? 2, 3 days, maybe? She turned it in her hands. 2 days in that cook shop. Before that, God knows. They don't buy fresh if they can help it. She pressed a thumb against the flesh. Still, got some give. Hasn't gone truly bad yet, but... She handed it back. You don't eat this as it is. You don't cut off the bad bits and hope for the best. You change it. She held up one finger. Boil it hard. Very hard. Not a gentle simmer. A rolling boil, minimum an hour. Then you throw the water away and boil it again. Why throw the first water away? Because the first water takes the worst of it with it. The smell, a lot of the bacteria. You don't know what bacteria are, and that's fine. I don't either. Not properly. But I know they come out in hot water. You throw the first water away and the second boil is cleaner. She paused. Then, and this is the important part, she pointed to the row of small earthenware pots on the shelf beside her door. Vinegar. Always vinegar. You finish with vinegar or you cook with something acid. Vinegar kills what the boiling might have missed, and it hides the flavour of age. She looked at you steadily. It doesn't make old meat young again, but it makes it safe enough. Usually. Usually, you said. I have been eating the food of St. Giles for 60 years, said old Sarah, and I am still here. She went back inside. Old Sarah had a list in her head. Not a written list, because she couldn't read, but a mental taxonomy of everything you might encounter in the markets and alleys of London, organised by what could be done with it. You'd been building your own version of that list since you were old enough to help your mother with the shopping. Here is what you know, at 14, that most children of 14 in other circumstances would never need to know. Bread. Bread goes stale before it goes bad. There's a difference. Stale bread is still food. You toast it, you soak it, you use it to thicken soups. When bread starts to show blue-grey mould at the edges, you cut that off. Cut generously. Not just the visible mould, but a good inch around it, and use the rest quickly. Green mould is worse. Black. Mould means you throw it to the pigs, and even then you feel slightly guilty. But bread that is merely old, merely dry, merely something a baker would never display in his window, that bread has 100 uses. It can be soaked in water and pressed into a kind of paste that you fry in dripping. It can be toasted on an iron plate over the fire until the outside is hard and the inside is soft again. It can be broken into small pieces and boiled with water and a little salt until it becomes a kind of porridge that isn't quite porridge, that has no particular flavour but fills the stomach in a way that matters. Bread is almost never truly gone. You almost never throw bread away. Meat. Meat is where the real education lies. Meat is where old Sarah's lessons become critical. Fresh meat, the kind the morning market buys, smells of nothing much, or of blood, or of the particular animal it came from. As it ages, it begins to speak. The smell changes in layers like a conversation, getting louder. Day 1, 2, still mostly fine. A slight sharpness, nothing alarming. Day 3, 4, getting interesting. This is where you need to make decisions. The smell is noticeable now, has a sour top note, and something that sits underneath it, heavier. This is the meat most of St. Giles eats. Bought cheap at end-of-day market prices, cooked hard, eaten with something acid. Day 5, 6, the danger zone. The smell is now assertive. It hits you when you open the pot, and it keeps hitting you. The surface of the meat may have taken on a slight greyish or greenish tinge. Your mother at this stage does something specific. She soaks it. Cold water, changed every hour if possible, with a handful of salt if she has it to spare. The salt draws out some of the worst. Then she boils it twice, and then she cooks it with whatever vinegar she can get, or a few drops of ale that's gone sour. Never throw away sour ale. It has acid in it, which is useful. And then she adds onion, because onion masks almost anything. The onion is the great liar of the kitchen, your mother once told you, with what you recognised as a kind of bitter affection. It tells your nose that everything is fine even when everything is not fine. Beyond day 6 or 7, depending on the temperature and whether the weather is hot, this is where old Sarah draws her line. Not everything past this line is dangerous. Sometimes meat can keep longer than you expect in cold weather. But this is where the math changes. The risk of feeding your family something that will make them violently ill becomes a real calculation against the benefit of getting another meal out of it. Your mother does this calculation constantly. You have watched her do it. She holds a piece of meat, or a fish, or a piece of offal, and you can see the calculation happening behind her eyes. How hungry are we? How sick could this make us? What are the alternatives? How much can I fix this with heat and acid and time? most of the time she errs toward using it, because the alternative to a risky meal is often no meal at all, and a child who is sick from bad food can potentially recover. A child who starves doesn't come back. You are moving fast now. It's the long way round to Drury Lane, through Monmouth Street, past the second-hand clothes sellers with their racks of other people's coats hanging outside in the thin October light, down the narrow cut through to Seven Dials, then out through Longacre. This city smells different at different hours. In the morning, before the crowds build, there's a window of about an hour when the night soils have been collected, and the day's coal fires are only just starting, when London smells almost clean. Almost. By midday it's layered. Cooking smells from the cook shops. Animal smells from the horses and pigs that share the streets with people. The river smell drifting up from the south if the wind is right. Tobacco smoke from every doorway. By afternoon, when you're heading to the market, it's all of those things compressed and concentrated by a day's worth of living. The food smells are strongest now. Hot fat from the cook shops, the sweet sick smell of overripe fruit, the iron and cold water smell of fish that has been sitting in its crate since morning. Drury Lane Market is not the Grand Market. Covent Garden is the Grand Market, the one with the flower sellers and the aristocratic ladies, and the gorgeous piles of the first strawberries of the season when season comes. Drury Lane is the market that operates in Covent Garden's shadow, catching what falls off the edge of the bigger stalls, selling at prices that the morning rush would never accept. By 5 o'clock, when the light is already thinking about failing, Drury Lane stalls are starting to pack down. This is the hour you need. You know the stalls by their smells before you see them. Jensen's fish, a sharp, cold, oceanic smell with an older note underneath it, like the sea recollecting something it would rather forget. The bread seller on the corner, whose bread is this morning's but already sold at half price because nobody buys yesterday's bread at yesterday's price. The vegetable cart with its heaps of outer cabbage leaves, its slightly soft parsnips, its onions with the papery skins going dark at the edges. Jensen himself is a wide man with a face the colour of old rope and hands so thoroughly impregnated with the smell of fish that you suspect he smells of it in his sleep. He's been selling fish on this corner for 20 years. He knows your mother. He knew your grandmother. Agnes, he says, without looking up from where he's wrapping something in old sacking. Your mother send you? Yes, sir. What's she got to spend? You have 6pence. You show him. He looks at the coins, then at the remaining fish on his display. Then he sighs the way a man sighs when he's made this particular calculation many times before and finds it no less tedious for the repetition. The remaining fish is, honest assessment, not good. Not catastrophic, but not good. 2 small herrings with eyes that have gone slightly milky. Half a salt cod that has been sitting since yesterday's tide delivery, dried and hard on the outside, but with a slightly tacky feel to the inside layer when you press it through the wrapping. A handful of oysters that are still alive. You can tell because their shells are tightly shut, but that won't be alive by tomorrow morning. The oysters, Jensen says. Take the oysters. They're still good today. Tomorrow I'm feeding them to the cat. And the cod? The cod. He turns it over in his hands, presses a thumb to it, holds it briefly to his nose with the expression of a man who long ago stopped being surprised by anything. The cod is salt cured, so it keeps longer than fresh, but it's been 2 days since I sold the last of that barrel, and the brine's not what it was. Your mother knows what to do with it? She knows what to do with everything, you say. He almost smiles. He gives you the oysters, the cod, and, surprising you, a small paper parcel that he pulls from under his counter. "Bones," he says. "Leftover. Was going to throw them in the river. Don't tell anyone." You take the fish bones wrapped in their small parcel and put them in your basket without saying anything, because in St. Giles you don't comment on acts of charity. You just accept them and move on, because making a thing of it makes it harder for everyone. "Tell your mother I said hello," Jensen says. "I will." You move on down the row. The vegetables are next. The woman who runs the cart is called Martha, and she has the aggressive cheerfulness of someone who has decided that optimism is a professional requirement, which it might be, selling late-day produce in Drury Lane. "Cabbage leaves," she says before you even open your mouth. "And I've got a parsnip with one soft end. You cut the end off, rest of it's fine. And look here." She holds up an onion. It's the size of a fist with a dark patch on one side where it's starting to go soft. "Half price. The outside leaves are going, but you peel back 2 layers and it's sound all the way through." You look at it. You're making your own calculation now. The one your mother taught you. What can be done with this? How much work does it require? Is the result worth the cost? 1 slightly soft onion, 2 layers of waste, good solid heart underneath. That's a foundation for almost anything. That's flavour for a pot of bones and water that would otherwise be just bones and water. "I'll take it," you say. Martha also has, somewhat mysteriously, a handful of dried peas that she says fell out of someone's cart this morning and that she swept up and put in a cloth bag. She offers them for a farthing. You take them. A farthing for a handful of dried peas that might have been on the ground of Drury Lane for several hours is, from one perspective, a terrible deal. From another perspective, dried peas plus water plus time equals something that can fill 3 children's stomachs. You pay the farthing. The bakery stall is manned by a boy about your age, one of the baker's apprentices from the shop on Long Acre, who comes out with the unsold bread at end of day and sells it cheaply rather than carry it back. He looks bored and cold and vaguely resentful of his position in the universe. The bread is 3 loaves. All of this morning's baking, all slightly denser than they should be, because the baker measured something wrong, or because the weather was too cold for the dough to rise properly. None of them sold at full price. None of them will sell at full price tomorrow when they're also a day older. 2 for the price of 1, the boy says. "I'm not carrying them back." You buy 2 loaves for 3p. They're heavy in your basket. The crust is still hard, which is a good sign. Soft crust on day-old bread means the bread was not properly cooked, which means the inside is still a little raw, which means it will go mouldy faster. Hard crust. Good. This bread will be gone in 2 days. Before then, you'll use it in every form. Fresh slices today, toasted tomorrow, soaked in the fish broth the day after. Nothing goes to waste. Nothing goes to waste. Your mother's name is Ellen Morrow, née Cooper. She grew up in Shoreditch, slightly less poor than St. Giles, which is a distinction that matters to people who understand London's careful geography of poverty. She came to St. Giles when she married your father, William Morrow, who was at the time a dyer's assistant with reasonable prospects, and is now a man with a persistent cough who does occasional day labour when he's well enough, which is not always. She's not bitter about this. Or if she is, she keeps it somewhere private, in a room inside herself that she never lets you see. What you see is someone who works. She was up before you this morning and she will be awake after you tonight, and in between those 2 facts she will have done more physical work than most people do in 3 days, and tomorrow she will do it again. The kitchen, calling it a kitchen is generous. It's the room with the fire and the shelf and the single iron pot, is the place where her real intelligence operates. Watch her hands. That's the thing about your mother. Her mind lives in her hands. You can see her thinking through them. She takes the salt cod you've brought back from the market and she holds it and she presses it and she smells it, all in one fluid motion that takes maybe 3 seconds. 2 days of brine left in it, she says. Maybe more. It's all right. She puts it in the pot and covers it with water. First soak. Cold water draws out the salt and some of the age. 2 hours minimum. Then we taste the water. If the water tastes mostly of salt, it's taken what we need it to take. If the water tastes of fish and salt, she makes a slight gesture, an old gesture that means we do it again. The bones from Jensen go into a separate pot with water from the bucket by the door. Water that you collected this morning from the pump on Neal Street. A 7-minute walk each way, 2 trips with the bucket, because 1 trip is never enough for a family of 5. Bones go in cold water, she says, not looking at you, doing this by feel. If you put bones in hot water, they seal. The marrow stays inside, the collagen stays inside. Cold water, slow heat. Everything comes out into the soup. Everything useful. She adds the fish bones, the onion, peeled to its clean layers, the soft outer leaves tossed into the fire because they are beyond saving, but the fire is grateful for them. The dried peas which she picked over with quick fingers, discarding the ones that look wrong. Too small, suspiciously dark, anything that smells musty. Dried peas, she says, catching you watching. What can go wrong with dried peas? Mould, you say. If they got wet before they dried properly. How do you tell? They smell. Off. Like a cellar. Right. And the texture? If they're too soft, they're already starting to go. They should be hard. Like little stones. She nods, satisfied. This is how the lessons happen. Not as formal instruction, but as questions and answers while her hands are doing something else entirely. These are fine, she says. Whoever dropped them was in a hurry. Their loss. The peas go into the pot. The cold water comes up around everything. She sets it on the fire that has been building since morning, that Tommy has been feeding with small pieces of coal that your mother budgets, with the same precision she budgets everything. Coal is money. Every piece of coal is a calculation. Let me walk you through something, because this is the part that most people now, most people even in 1751 with full bellies and proper kitchens, don't understand about cooking poor. When your mother makes a pot of soup, she's not just making soup. She's engaged in a process that starts 2, 3, sometimes 4 days before the actual eating. It starts with the soak. Salt cod, like the piece from Jensen, has been cured in brine. The salt preserved it, which is why it's still edible 2 days after it should have been sold. But that salt is now part of the problem. Too much salt, and the soup is undrinkable. So the first thing is to get the salt out, which means water, time, patience. The bones need to give up their marrow and their collagen, the stuff that makes cheap soup filling, that gives it body, that turns water that looks like water into something that coats the inside of your stomach and makes your body think it has received something substantial. This also takes time. An hour of gentle heat minimum, 2 hours better. The peas need to soften. Dried peas, depending on how long they've been dried and how well they were stored, can take anywhere from 40 minutes to 2 hours to become edible. These are probably somewhere in the middle. All of this happens in sequence and in parallel. While the cod is soaking, the bone broth is building. While the peas are softening, the The cod is being tasted and, if necessary, soaked again. And your mother is doing all of this while also minding Nell, who is 4 years old and currently investigating the contents of the coal bucket with the focused interest of a scientist examining a new specimen. While watching Tommy, who has taken his shoes off for some reason and is sitting near the fire in his stockinged feet reading a piece of paper that he found in the street. Reading being generous. He's learning, working through the letters slowly, his lips moving, while calculating, in her head, what they'll eat tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. You set the basket down and begin unpacking. The 2 loaves of bread on the shelf. The higher shelf, which is fractionally drier and cooler than the lower one, which matters. The oysters into the smaller pot with a little water, which your mother will cook tonight before they lose their will to live. The coins you have left, a penny, a halfpenny, back into the small cloth bag that lives in the crack between the hearthstone and the wall, which is not a hiding place that would fool anyone, but which lives in a part of the house that a stranger wouldn't think to look, and in St. Giles you always have to think about strangers. "Did Jensen ask after me?" your mother says. "Said to tell you hello." She makes a sound that might be satisfaction, might be something else. "He's a good man," she says. "He does what he can." She means, he gives you bones that he could sell. He holds the worst of the leftovers for customers he knows instead of throwing them in the street. In St. Giles, this is what goodness looks like. Not grand gestures, small ones. Bones, a misshapen onion. Not looking too closely at who put what in whose basket. Here is a thing you know from the outside, from glimpses through open doors and back gate conversations, from the afternoons you spend helping Mrs. Hargrove, the cook 2 streets over at a merchant's house on Great Queen Street. Rich people throw away extraordinary amounts of food, not because they're wasteful exactly, or not only because they're wasteful, it's because their standards are different. A chicken that is 2 days old and has the first faint smell of age on it goes into the waste bucket at Mrs. Hargrove's kitchen. A piece of beef that has been sitting since Tuesday is sent out with the kitchen boy to be disposed of. Bread baked on Monday is not on the family's breakfast table on Thursday. This food doesn't disappear, it goes somewhere. And where it goes, and how it travels from the waste buckets of Great Queen Street to the tables of St. Giles, is itself a kind of system, a shadow economy, a supply chain that operates entirely without being written down or officially acknowledged. At the bottom of the area steps, the steps that lead down to the kitchen level, below the street, at Mrs. Hargrove's house there is a wooden box. Nothing special about it. Nothing to indicate it's anything other than a box. Twice a week, the contents of that box, the bread ends, the dripping from the Sunday roast, the bones from Monday's stew, the fat trimmed from the butcher's delivery, the vegetable peelings that accumulated over several days, are taken by a woman called Peg, who comes at 7 in the morning and empties the box into a sack she carries over her shoulder. Peg is 30 years old or 50. It's difficult to tell. She moves fast and she doesn't waste words. She's been coming to empty this particular box for as long as Mrs. Hargrove has worked in that kitchen, which is 11 years. Before Peg, someone else came. Before that, someone else again. Where Peg takes the sack is her business. But you know, because old Sarah told you, because your mother told you, because these things are common knowledge among the women of St. Giles who need to know them, that the contents of that sack and sacks like it feed people. They are sorted, sold, used. The dripping goes to the women who render fat. The bones go to the soup sellers. The bread ends end up in the ordinary on Mercer Street, incorporated into the bread pudding that sells for a halfpenny a bowl. The system is invisible to the people at the top of it, but it is very visible to the people at the bottom. Now here is the thing that people with full bellies find hardest to understand. The food in Peg's sack is not garbage. Let me be precise about this. By the standards of Mrs. Hargrove's kitchen, by the standards of the merchant's household on Great Queen Street, it is finished, done, past the point where it would be served to the family, but past the point where it would be served to a merchant's family, and gone bad are not the same thing, not even close. The dripping, the fat collected from a Sunday roast, can be used as it is, for cooking, for spreading on bread. It keeps for days if kept cool. It makes bread edible that would otherwise be merely fuel. The bread ends. Stale, yes. Hard, yes. A day or two past what would pass at a good table, are still bread. They are, as I have said, a substance with 100 uses. The bones have given one round of stock already, but they have more in them. Bones are generous. Bones, if you boil them long enough, will give you collagen and minerals and that silky quality that turns water into something that sticks to your ribs. The second boil is thinner than the first. Yes, the third thinner still. But until the bones are soft enough to bend, they have not given everything they have. And the vegetable peelings, potato skins, carrot tops, the outer leaves of cabbages, these are nutritious. This is not a comforting story I'm telling you. This is botany. The outer layers of vegetables contain fibre and vitamins and everything the vegetable was using to protect itself. In a wealthy kitchen, they go in the bucket. In your kitchen, they go in the pot. The pot. Always the pot. Always the fire. Always the slow, patient extraction of everything useful from everything available. On a Wednesday afternoon in October, when the light dies early and the air has that particular bite that says winter is not a threat but a promise, old Sarah teaches you to make something she calls doctor's broth. You're in her room, which smells of dried herbs and something savoury that has been cooking so long it's become part of the walls. Her shelves hold an astonishing collection of small pots and twisted paper packets and things tied with string. She moves among them with the authority of a woman who knows exactly where everything is in the dark. Sit down, she says. Watch. She has, on the table before her, a piece of pork belly that is, by any objective assessment, not in good shape. The colour has gone from pink to grey pink. The smell is there, that back of the throat slightly too sweet smell that tells your body to pay attention, even if your mind hasn't quite caught up. First question, she says, without touching it yet. What does your nose tell you? It's gone, you say, or going. Gone to what degree? You lean in carefully. The smell is sharp and sweet, and underneath it, something meaty and wrong, but not the worst you've encountered. Not the smell of things that have crossed a line you can't bring back from. Still in the middle, you say. Good. Now, she picks it up. What does your eye tell you? The surface of the pork is slightly tacky, the colour uneven, grey in the creases, paler on the raised surfaces, no visible growth, no green or black. No mould, you say. Correct. Mould you can sometimes cut away, but no mould means you haven't lost the race yet. She presses the flesh with one thick finger. Texture? Soft. Softer than it should be. Softer than it should be is not the same as unsafe. What makes meat unsafe is not softness, not even smell on its own. What makes it unsafe is certain things that grow in it, and whether those things have been there long enough and deep enough that you can't cook them out, She puts the pork down. Most of what makes meat smell bad is on the surface. The surface is where air gets to it. The interior of a piece of meat in the early stages of going off is often still usable. Cutting the surface off, you say. Cutting generously. An inch, not a scraping. She picks up a knife and demonstrates. What she removes is a thin layer of grey-pink from all sides of the pork belly, leaving the interior, which is, she's right, paler and fresher smelling than the outside. Now, she says, dropping the trimmed scraps into a separate pot, even these have a use, boiled hard and strained, the resulting liquid useful for something. We build the doctor, what she puts into the pot with the trimmed pork, salt. More salt than you would use with fresh meat. Enough salt that you can taste it clearly in the water at the end. Salt is, old Sarah says, the great clarifier. It kills what can be killed by salt, which is quite a lot. Vinegar, a splash from the dark bottle on the middle shelf. She tips it in with a practiced gesture, a measure she doesn't bother to count because she's been counting it in her hands for 30 years. An onion, quartered. Not because onion kills anything, but because onion transforms the smell of a kitchen into the smell of cooking, which has a psychological effect that old Sarah takes seriously. You eat with your nose first, she says. If the kitchen smells of onion, your body prepares to eat. If it smells of fear... She doesn't finish this sentence, but you understand it. Bay leaf. This she gets from a small twist of paper on the high shelf. Bay is antibacterial. She doesn't use that word, she says it kills the bad humours, which is the explanation that makes sense in 1751, and it adds depth to the smell, must the animal notes in the broth. Water, cold to cover. She puts it on the fire, high heat, and stands over it until it boils. The moment it boils, she reduces the fire to something low and patient. You must boil it fast to start, she says. The first boil kills, then you simmer slow to build the body. She puts a lid on the pot. She looks at you. How long, you ask? This cut? 3 hours minimum, maybe 4. You want the meat to fall apart when you press it with a spoon. She sits down in her chair by the window, takes up some mending, and for a moment she looks like someone resting. Then, "You're not doing anything else for the next 4 hours, are you?" "You're not." "Then sit with it. Learn the sounds. Every pot has a different voice when it's working properly. You want to hear a steady murmur, not a silence and not a violent boil. Silence means the fire went out. Violent boil means you're cooking all the flavour out and filling the air with steam." "A murmur, you say?" "A murmur," she confirms, "like a conversation going well." 3 hours and 40 minutes later, the kitchen smells extraordinary. Not what you expected. You expected the smell of old meat, masked by onion. What you get is something richer and deeper than that. A smell that seems to have nothing to do with what went into the pot. A smell that suggests hearth and warmth and abundance in a way that the raw ingredients, held up individually, absolutely did not suggest. Old Sarah lifts the lid. She takes a long-handled spoon and presses it against the pork. The meat gives completely, sighing into itself. "Done," she says. She ladles some of the broth into a cup and holds it out. You smell it first. It smells of deep, savoury warmth, of salt and bay and pork and thyme. You taste it. It is, and this is strange, this is the thing that takes you a moment to process. Good. Not just edible, not just safe. Actually good. Deep and satisfying, and with a richness at the back of your throat that the thin soups your household usually eats don't have. How, you say? Old Sarah almost smiles. because the things that were wrong with that meat are gone, she says. The heat took them. The acid took them. What's left is just pork. The bones, the collagen, the fat, all the things that were always in it. Underneath the decay was just the meat. She takes the cup back, tastes it herself, nods once. Salt! She adds a pinch from the salt box. What can't be fixed is what you cut away. What's left? That's yours. Don't let anyone tell you different. There is a place on Mercer Street called Widow Turner's. You have been going there since you were small enough to be carried. Most of St. Giles has been going there since Widow Turner herself was a young woman, which was quite some time ago. The sign above the door says Ordinary and Cook Shop, which is technically accurate in the way that Calling Street, Giles, a residential neighbourhood, is technically accurate. It provides the service implied, at prices that the residents of the neighbourhood can actually afford, and no one asks too many questions. An ordinary, for those unfamiliar with the term, is a place where you pay a set price, ordinarily a penny or two, and receive a meal. Not a meal you choose, a meal that has been prepared. You sit at the long common table, you are given a bowl and a spoon, and food appears. Usually a bowl of something and bread. The food at Widow Turner's changes daily, depending on what Widow Turner was able to obtain. This is where economy of scale meets the science of bad food, and produces something genuinely impressive. Widow Turner buys, at end-of-market prices, quantities that a single family couldn't use before they turned. But Widow Turner is not feeding one family. She is feeding 50, 60 people a day, which means she can buy a large piece of poor beef and use all of it. She can buy a bushel of slightly too soft vegetables and incorporate them into soup before they lose their last usefulness. She can take the bread that the bakery couldn't sell that day, last week's bread that the bakery couldn't sell last week, and transform it. The bread transformation is the thing you find most remarkable. 2-week-old bread, which is no longer bread, not really, which is a dry, dense object that could double as a building material, can, with sufficient treatment, become bread pudding. This requires the old bread soaked in water or weak beer until it softens back into something pliable, mixed with whatever sweetness can be found, molasses, the cheapest sweetener available, or sometimes just sugar that's been sitting so long it's gone slightly dark and clumped, and eggs when they can be obtained cheaply, which is not always. This mixture is baked in the large pan over the open fire. The result is neither bread nor pudding exactly. It is its own thing. It is dense and heavy and slightly sweet and enormously filling, and at Widow Turner's it sells for a halfpenny a slice. You have eaten it many times. It is not elegant food. It does not taste of freshness or morning air or first of the season anything. It tastes of being warm, of not being hungry, of having made it through another day. You have learned not to take that for granted. The genius of Widow Turner's operation, and it is a kind of genius, though no one would use that word about a woman who runs a cook shop in St. Giles, is in how she handles meat. She has a relationship with 3 or 4 butchers in the area, not the grand butchers of Leadenhall Market, with their rows of perfect cuts and their proud displays. Smaller men working in the margins of the trade who acquire meat that the grand butchers have declined, meat that is old but not gone, offal that has been sitting but hasn't crossed the line, the parts of animals that the wealthy do not eat and the comfortable do not particularly want to deal with, liver, kidneys, heart, lungs, the stomach, the feet, the head. There is, in the tradition of British cooking that is even now being practised in the poorest kitchens of London, a dish called brawn, or, depending on where you come from, head cheese, though calling it cheese is a creative act of the imagination. It is made from a pig's head, the whole head, boiled for many hours with spices and vinegar and whatever aromatics are available, until the meat falls completely from the bones, and then the whole mass of shredded meat and cooking liquid is poured into a bowl and left to cool, where the gelatin from the bones and skin causes it to set solid. The result is a thing that can be sliced like bread, that keeps for several days if cool, that is dense with protein and fat and flavour, and that can be made from the cut of pig that nobody else wanted. Widow Turner makes brawn once a week. You have watched her do it in the big kitchen behind the ordinary, the kitchen that smells permanently of rendered fat and old onions and something medicinal from the herbs that hang drying from the raftered ceiling. She works with a large, calm efficiency, the pig's head going into the biggest pot over the best fire, and she will periodically check on it over the course of a long afternoon, adding water as needed, the house slowly filling with a smell that is frankly not entirely pleasant at first. There is something raw and animal about the smell of a pig's head in its first hour of boiling, but that transforms over 3-4 hours into something rich and deep and unmistakably good. You have to be patient with the things that start ugly, she told you once, when you were maybe 9 years old and watching this process with some combination of fascination and revulsion. Most things that start ugly get better if you give them enough time. At 9 years old, you weren't sure if she was talking about the brawn or about something else. At 14, you still aren't sure, but the brawn is good. The brawn, sliced thin on bread, is a meal. The brawn, which cost Widow Turner a small amount because no one else wanted the head, feeds 20 people at a halfpenny a portion. This is the math of survival, not profit margins, feeding margins. How much does this cost to obtain and process, divided by how many people it can feed? Widow Turner has been doing this math her whole life. She does it in her sleep, you think. She does it while she's stirring the pot and while she's collecting money at the door and while she's giving the end-of-day leftovers, because there are always some. To the children who wait outside after closing time. There are always children who wait outside after closing time. You were one of them for several years. There is a tide to London, and it's not the tide of the Thames, it's the tide of food. In the morning it flows one direction, from market to kitchen, from supplier to buyer, from fresh to consumed. The food moves, money moves with it, the city eats. By afternoon the tide turns. What wasn't eaten begins to move the other way, from kitchen to waste, from stall to discard, from the tables of those who can choose to the hands of those who cannot. And by evening there is a third movement, less visible, but just as real, down toward the river. The Thames absorbs a remarkable amount of London. This is partly because the Thames is the city's sewer, because the drains of 500,000 people empty into it, which is something you don't think about most of the time, and which when you do think about it you try to stop thinking about. But it also absorbs the city's food waste. Kitchen slops, bones, rinds, anything too far gone even for the uses of people like you and your mother. Down the drain, down the alley, into the river. But before things get to the river, they pass through a community of people who make their living from other people's leavings. They are called, variously, mudlarks, scavengers, shore workers, different names for different specialties, but all part of the same shadow economy. At low tide, when the muddy banks of the Thames are exposed, you can see them. Bent figures moving slowly along the water's edge, picking through the mud for anything of value, coal that fell from barges, rope, metal, wood, and food. Fish that escaped from nets and died in the shallows, shellfish from the tidal zones, edible plants that grow along the margins, the overflow from market boats that leaked or spilled. You have not done this yourself. Your mother considers the river margins dangerous, which they are. The mud can be treacherous, and there are parts of the tidal zone where a person who doesn't know the river can go down without warning. But you know the people who have. Old Sarah's grandson, before he was old enough to get proper work, spent 2 winters mudlarking. He came home each day with what he'd found, and the family ate on it. Told you once that the best thing you could find was oysters. Oysters cling to the wooden piles of the wharves, growing in clusters in the tidal zone, entirely free for anyone willing to get cold and wet to get them. Oysters that in the morning market sold for 6 pence a dozen were here, at no cost whatsoever, if you knew where to look and were willing to wade into the November Thames to get them. Coldest thing I've ever done, he said, but oysters every day for a month. The river gives back, in other words. What the city throws away, the river holds in trust for those who need it enough to come and take it. The question your mother thinks about most is not, how do we eat today? It's how do we eat for the next 3 days? 1 meal at a time is a desperate calculation. 3 days at a time is the beginning of strategy. And strategy, applied over time, is the difference between a family that survives a hard winter and one that doesn't. Here is the principle your mother works from. The goal is never freshness. The goal is usefulness over time. Fresh food is gone in a day. Preserved food, salted, smoked, pickled, dried, lasts weeks. The math is obvious. If you have the resources to preserve things, salt costs money, vinegar costs money. The facilities to smoke something properly are not usually available in a one-room flat above a tenement in St. Giles. But there are approximations, things that gesture toward preservation with what you actually have. Salting a piece of meat, even imperfectly, slows the clock, not stops it, slows it. A piece of pork that would turn in 3 days at room temperature might last 5 with a rubbing of salt and a cool spot to sit in. A cool spot in October is the northeast corner of the room, away from the fire where the temperature drops in the night and the cold seeps through the wall. Dripping, the rendered fat from cooking, the collected grease from any animal that passes through the kitchen, is itself a form of preservation. Fat is acidic and resists microbial growth. You can store cooked meat in fat submerged and it will last longer than meat stored in air. This is the principle behind confit, though you have never heard that word, and it is, at this point in history, a French technique. But the principle exists in English kitchens too, in the form of potted meats, shredded cooked meat, pressed into a pot and sealed with a layer of melted fat that hardens as it cools. This seal keeps the air out. Air is, more than warmth, the enemy of kept food. Your mother makes potted meat when she has enough of anything to pot, which is not often. But when she does, the small earthenware pot on the shelf, sealed with its fat cool and dark, represents something, a tomorrow, a day when there might not be money for the market, when the rent is due and everything available has gone to it, when the larder is empty except for that one pot. A pot of potted meat is insurance. It is tomorrow's emergency ration. You never touch it until you have to. Last February you had to. For 5 days, the potted pork your mother made in November was the foundation of everything you ate. She stretched it across 5 days by using it the way she used all preserved things, sparingly, as flavour rather than substance. A spoonful in water made broth. A small piece on bread made a meal. You were hungry, genuinely hungry, for those 5 days, but you ate. There's difference between hungry and starving. Understanding that difference is something you have learned to be grateful for. The cold comes in properly on a Tuesday. You wake, and the blanket is not enough. Nell has pulled more than her share of it in the night. She does this without malice, in her sleep, with the irresistible self-preservation of a 4-year-old, and your shoulder and arm above the blanket are shockingly cold, the cold of outside air that has found its way through the gap in the window frame that Da was supposed to fix in September and didn't. The fire in the main room has gone completely out. This is a problem of a specific kind, not a disaster, not yet, but a problem with consequences. Coal costs money. Relighting a fire from scratch takes tinder and effort. Your mother is already calculating this, you can tell as you come downstairs and find her sitting with her shawl pulled around her shoulders, staring at the cold grate with an expression you've learned to read. Not despair, but the face she makes when she is adding up. Tommy, you say. He's already awake, sitting against the wall with his knees pulled up to his chest. Go to old Sarah, ask her if she can spare a hot coal. Borrow and fire, this is a thing in your world. A neighbour's fire that has been banked properly can provide a live coal that will start yours. It costs nothing but the favour, and favours in St. Giles are the currency that runs parallel to money, just as real, just as carefully tracked. Tommy goes. Your mother looks at the shelf. There is bread. There's a small amount of dried oats. There is the bottle with perhaps a third of vinegar left in it. There is salt. Barely. The bottom of the small tin. Enough for perhaps 2 more cookings. There is nothing else. What did you see on the way home yesterday? She asks without looking at you. This is another lesson she's taught you without explicitly teaching it. Always observe, always catalogue, always know what is available, what is going, what might become available. Jensen's had cod again, you say. Same barrel, I think. He'll have to move it soon. Good. The baker on Longacre had a fire in the back room. Not serious, but he was selling whatever was left fast, trying to clear the shop. Bread was cheap, her eyes sharpen. How cheap? He was doing 4 loaves for 2 pennies, but that was yesterday afternoon. Gone by now, probably, she thinks. But a baker who had a fire is a baker who needs to restock. He'll be buying flour, which means he'll be baking again soon. And when he's just back from a scare, he sometimes sells cheap to get the customers back. This is the kind of information that circulates in St. Giles among women like your mother, traded in doorways and at the water pump, and while waiting in the market, which baker is struggling, which butcher is overstocked, which cook shop is trying to clear inventory before it turns. Not gossip, intelligence, operational information about where the next meal might come from. Tommy comes back with a clay pot, inside which a red coal glows like a small heart. Your mother takes it with both hands and bends toward the grate, and the morning begins. The cold changes everything about bad food. In summer, you have days. In winter, sometimes you have weeks. Cold is the great ally of the poor kitchen. It does, imperfectly and without permission, what wealthy households' larders do on purpose. It slows the process of decay. A piece of meat that would last 3 days in July can last 7 in November, if you keep it in the coldest corner of the room. Not forever. Not even close to forever. But longer. This is why November, despite the cold and the expense of coal, and the short days and the ice in the water bucket in the morning, is in some ways easier than August. In August, everything is against you. The heat makes the meat race toward ruin. The warm, damp air invites mould. You have to move fast, cook fast, eat fast, because the clock is sprinting. In November, the clock walks. Your mother uses this. She plans around it. Things bought in November can be made to stretch in ways that July never allowed. The piece of salt cod from Jensen's, soaked and trimmed and cooked, gives broth on the first day. The broth with the dried peas makes soup on the second day. The bones from the broth, simmered again with a fresh onion and a scraping of oats to thicken, make something resembling porridge on the third day. The fish bones themselves, boiled to softness, over the course of those 3 days, eventually release everything in them. By the time they're done, they're almost transparent. Not everything that fed the family in those 3 days was what most people in 1751 would have recognised as proper food. Some of it was objectively the diluted memory of food, the ghost of a fish that used to be a fish, water that had sat near enough to nutrition to have absorbed some quality of it. But caloric math does not care about quality. It cares about, did the children eat today? Did they go to sleep without crying? Did they eat? They ate. Nell gets sick on a Thursday. It starts the way most childhood sicknesses start, with a complaint that could be anything. A stomachache, a reluctance to eat the morning oats, a quietness that is the wrong kind of quiet. 4-year-olds are generally not quiet. When Nell is quiet, something is wrong. Your mother notices before you do. She's been noticing Nell's sick sign for 4 years, and she has them memorized. The particular way Nell goes still, the slight glassiness of the eyes, the way she holds her stomach with one small hand as if holding something in. What did she eat yesterday? Your mother asks, and her voice has a specific quality, level and calm, that you have learned means she is more concerned than she is letting on. Yesterday Nell ate oats in the morning, a piece of bread with dripping at noon, and in the evening a small portion of the brawn from Widow Turner's, purchased with the last few coins of the week, on the reasoning that it was dense with protein and cheaper than alternatives, and Nell had been looking thin. The brawn. You think about the brawn, about whether it had been fresh, about the last time Widow Turner's kitchen had a day you might describe as concerning. The particular smell of that kitchen in a warm September, a different smell than the usual savoury depth. But this is November. The brawn was made on Tuesday, you ate it on Wednesday. Your mother is pressing gently on Nell's stomach. Nell whimpers. Tender, your mother says to herself. You know that word in this context. Not tender in the sense of gentle, tender in the sense of hurting to the touch. The brawn, you say. Your mother doesn't answer immediately. She's looking at Nell's face, at the colour of her skin. She's warm, she says. Is it? You start and stop, because there is a difference in your experience and your mother's experience and old Sarah's experience between a stomachache from bad food and the worst thing. The thing that kills children in St. Giles at a rate that your mother never talks about directly, but that you understand from the number of small graves in the churchyard, from the faces of women on the street who have that particular loss in their eyes. A stomachache from bad food is usually survivable, unpleasant, painful, sometimes lasting days. But the body generally manages it. The body knows how to be sick. Sickness is a defense mechanism. The body trying to expel something that shouldn't be there. The worst thing, whatever it is that takes children, whatever it is that doesn't stop at sick and keeps going, that is not survivable in the same way. Fetch old Sarah, your mother says. You're already moving. Old Sarah arrives with her apron still on and a cloth bag over her arm, the bag that holds her particular collection of treatments. She is, in St. Giles, what passes for a doctor in the absence of money for an actual doctor. Her knowledge is accumulated over 60 years of watching children survive and not survive things, of trying different remedies and tracking what worked, of a kind of ruthless empiricism that would have been impressive in any context. She looks at Nell. She looks at her eyes, pressing a finger to the corner, checking the colour of the inner lid, which means something to her even if you don't entirely understand what. She smells her breath, which seems unusual until you realise she is checking for something specific. A fruity smell, she's told you before, can mean something different from a rank smell, which means something different from a nothing smell. She presses on Nell's stomach gently. Nell cries sharply once. "Higher or lower than the belly button?" Sarah asks your mother. "Lower. She's holding here." Your mother indicates, her hands not quite touching Nell's body, hovering above the place where Nell keeps pressing her own hand. Sarah's face goes through something that you try to read and can't quite. When did it start? This morning. She woke up and wouldn't eat. Loose stool? Not that I've seen. Vomiting? Once. Just the once, early. Sarah straightens up. She looks at your mother for a moment, and there is a communication between them that doesn't require words. The communication of women who have watched this particular situation play out enough times to have a shared vocabulary for it. "How long has she had the pain?" Sarah asks. "Since this morning, maybe earlier. I'm not sure if she was troubled in the night." Sarah opens her cloth bag. She removes a small dark bottle, a twist of dried leaves, a piece of beeswax wrapped in paper. "Ginger root," she says, "for the stomach. I'll make it as tea. Peppermint with it, which will ease the cramping." She looks at your mother directly. "If it gets worse, not just the same, you need to go to the apothecary. I know what that costs. I'm telling you anyway." The apothecary costs 6pence minimum for a consultation. 6pence is, right now, most of what you have to buy food for the next 4 days. Your mother nods once. "I'll watch her," Sarah says. The afternoon passes in the particular suspended quality of days that are waiting for something to happen. Nell dozes on the straw mattress, the blankets pulled around her, her breathing detectable from across the room if you stand very still and concentrate. It's even, her breathing. That's good. You keep checking. Your mother's in the kitchen, but she's not cooking. She's sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of weak tea, watching the fire. This is unusual. Your mother sitting still, not doing something, is a version of your mother that appears perhaps twice a year, when something is taking all her attention without giving her anything to do with it. Tommy's very quiet. He understands, with the particular sensitivity of a 7-year-old, who has grown up watching his mother's face for information, that this is not a day for questions or requests or anything that adds to the weight of the room. You do what you can do. You fetch water. You keep the fire going. You make yourself useful in small ways that can't solve the actual problem, but that mean you're not just standing in the hallway watching your 4-year-old sister breathe. Old Sarah comes in at 2 and at 4 and checks each time. Temperature with her hand on Nell's forehead, the pressure on the stomach, the eyes, the breathing. At 4 o'clock she says, "The temperature is up." Your mother puts down the cup. "How much up?" she asks. "Enough. Not dangerous yet, but enough." Sarah looks at her. "You have anything left for the apothecary?" Silence. The coins in the cloth bag behind the hearthstone, a penny, a halfpenny. "There's," you start. I have a shilling, old Sarah says. She says it flatly, as if it is a practical observation, not an offer, not a kindness, just a fact. I kept it for the landlord, but the landlord can wait. He's waited before. Your mother looks at her for a long moment. I'll pay it back, she says. I know you will, Sarah says. Go. Don't wait for it to get worse. The apothecary your mother trusts, the one she has been to before, the one who sees St. Giles' patients without contempt, which is not something you can say about all of them, is on Holborn, 20 minutes walk. 20 minutes in October at 7 in the evening with no link boy and no lantern. You take a candle in a tin holder. It doesn't do much. The wind on Holborn keeps trying to take it. Your mother walks fast. You keep up. The streets are not empty. London is never empty. But they have the evening quality. The shadows long and the respectable people mostly inside. The taverns lit and loud. The corners occupied by various versions of the night's work. You pass, on the corner of Drury Lane, two men arguing about something with the low, dangerous intensity of people who are close to not arguing anymore. You cross to the other side of the street without breaking stride. Your mother doesn't even look. The narrow courts off Long Acre have that particular sound, a kind of aggregate human murmur. Dozens of people in spaces built for a fraction of them. The sound of too much living compressed into too little space. Cooking smells, coal smoke, the smell of gin from the cellar shop whose lamplight falls in a yellow wedge across the mud. A woman is sitting in the doorway of a gin shop with a sleeping baby in her arms. The baby is very still. You look, and then you look away because you do not know if the stillness is sleep, and there is nothing you can do either way. Your mother knows where she's going. She has navigated this city for 32 years on foot, in the dark, with and without candles, with children in her arms and children in her belly, and the permanent arithmetic of survival calculating behind her eyes. She pushes through the door of the apothecary's on Holborn. The apothecary is a man named Mr. Callum, who is thin and precise, and has the manner of someone who has decided that brevity is a form of respect for the people who come to him at this hour. No unnecessary words, no false reassurance. You tell him the symptoms, the stomach pain, the location, the single vomiting, the rising temperature, and he listens with his eyes slightly unfocused. The way people listen when they're thinking harder than they're watching. He asks 4 questions, you answer them. He goes to his shelves. What he comes back with: a small paper packet of something powdered, chalk, essentially, calcium carbonate, which does something useful in stomachs that are producing too much acid, and a larger packet of dried herbs which he describes as physic for the bowel, and which smells, when you open it slightly on the way home, like a mixture of things you don't fully recognise, but which has a medicinal clarity to it, clean and slightly bitter. He charges 4p. You pay with old Sarah's shilling. He gives back 8p change. Keep her warm, he says. Keep fluids in her if you can. If the pain moves to the right side specifically, or if the temperature continues to rise by morning, come back. A pause. Or if you can't afford to come back, send to St. Giles' workhouse. They have a physician on Thursdays. Your mother nods. She puts the change and the packets in the cloth bag she carries under her shawl, the same bag where she keeps the family's money close to her body, because in this neighbourhood you keep the things that matter close to your body. Thank you, she says. Go home, he says. Not unkindly. The walk back is the same streets but feels different. You have done something. You have the packets. You have spent money that was supposed to buy food, and instead bought medicine, which is a trade that is simultaneously entirely obvious and entirely painful. Your mother doesn't speak on the way back. You don't either. The streets are getting quieter. The worst of the evening traffic has moved indoors. Your candle in its tin holder has burned down to a stub. You cup your hand around it against the wind and it keeps going just. Back through the narrow court off Long Acre, past the gin shop. The woman with the baby is gone from the doorway, past the corner where the two men were arguing. Whatever the argument was, it has resolved itself one way or another. Up the step, through the door, up the creaking stairs. Nell is awake. She's sitting up against the wall with the blanket round her shoulders, and her eyes are brighter than they were this afternoon. Clearer, less glassy. Old Sarah is sitting beside her, and she looks up when you come in, and her face tells you before she says anything. Fever broke, old Sarah says. About an hour ago. She was sick once more, which I think was actually good, cleared whatever was in her stomach, and then she cooled down. She looks at Nell. She's hungry. Nell, with the beautiful pragmatism of a 4-year-old recovering from illness, says, "I want bread." Your mother makes a sound that is not quite a laugh, and not quite a cry. She finds the bread. She tears a piece. She gives it to Nell. Nell eats it. You don't sleep much. Not because of worry. Nell is clearly better, clearly on the other side of whatever it was, her breathing the right kind of even now, her body relaxed under the blanket. Not worry, just the aftermath of it. The body that was wound up for something and hasn't fully been told it can stop. You lie in the dark and you listen to the night sounds of the building, the creak of the structure settling in the cold, Mrs. Perkins below you, moving with the methodical shuffle she has at midnight, the sound she makes when she can't sleep and takes a walk around her one room to tire herself out, the distant tavern noise, which doesn't fully stop until past 2, the bells, you count them. St. Giles is not far from several churches, none of them with the famous bells of the city proper, but all of them marking the hours with a kind of patient regularity that is the city's heartbeat. 2, 3, 4. At 4, the city begins to stir again. You can hear it. The first carts on the street, the sound of someone further down the row starting a fire, the particular silence that precedes the first light starting to lift. You get up. Your mother is already up, of course she is. She has the pot on the fire with the remains of the dried peas from yesterday, which went unused in the crisis, soaking in water. She's mixing the chalk powder from the apothecary's packet into a small cup of water, moving it with a spoon until it dissolves, because Nell will need it again this morning. "How are you?" you ask. She looks at you briefly, an expression that includes several things: exhaustion, residual fear, the specific relief of having got through the night, and something harder to name. Something like the look of a person who has been running for a very long time and knows there is more running still to come. "Fine," she says. This is, in your family's vocabulary, not an emotional statement. It is a strategic one. Fine means, I am still here, I am still functioning, we proceed. You sit down at the table. "The money from the apothecaries," you say. 8 pence back. "I know. That's 4 days' food if we're careful." "I know. And we still have the bread and the oats." "Agnes." She puts the spoon down. She looks at you directly, and her face has dropped whatever professional calm she maintains when the children are watching. What you see underneath it is simply tired, profoundly tired, the kind of tired that is not one night, but years. "I know all of this. I'm always calculating. What I'm not always doing is having the conversation about the calculation, because some things I need to just carry. You look at her. Tell me what I can do, you say. She picks the spoon back up. She stirs the chalk into the water. Go to old Sarah this morning, she says. Tell her thank you. Tell her I'll have the shilling back before the end of the month. Don't accept it when she says it doesn't matter. Just say I'll have it back. She looks at you. And ask her about the salt pork she mentioned last week. Whether she still has it. If she's willing to trade the recipe. Trade the recipe for what? I'll think of something, your mother says. I always do. Winter comes in full. Then Christmas, which in St. Giles is observed in the way that things are observed when you have no money for celebration. The church is cold, the sermon long, the dinner whatever could be assembled with the savings carefully built over the preceding weeks. Your mother started saving for Christmas in October. Not money. There was almost no money to save, but things. A small piece of dried fruit put by. A piece of lard saved for the one day when you would render it for pastry. The best of the remaining salt pork set aside. Christmas dinner in your household in 1751 is a small mutton pie made with mutton that is 2 days old and has been treated with the full rigour of your mother's knowledge. Soaked, boiled, treated with vinegar, then baked in a pastry shell that uses every technique she has to compensate for the flour that's slightly damp and the lard that's slightly old. The pastry is not beautiful. It is short and slightly crumbling, and the crust is darker on one side than the other. It is the best thing you have eaten in months. You eat it at the table with Tommy and Nell and your mother and your father, who has come back from wherever he goes when he goes, who looks thin and sheepish, and who eats his portion quickly and says the pie is excellent, which it is, and who does not ask where the sixpence for the apothecary came from, which is also a choice of sorts. After dinner, Nell falls asleep on the chair. Tommy reads his piece of newspaper. Your father sits by the fire. Your mother cleans the table. You sit beside her and dry the pot while she washes it. And outside the window the snow that started in the morning has been building all afternoon, and St. Giles is quiet under it, the mud and the sewage and the cramped courts all temporarily covered, the city made for a few hours into something like the picture of a city rather than the actual thing. Next year, you say, meaning nothing particular by it. Just next year, your mother dries her, hands on her apron. Next year, she agrees. Spring comes slowly and then all at once, the way it does in London, where one day you're pulling your shawl tight against February, and the next the market has strawberries, and the air smells of something other than coal. You are 15 now. The year has done something to you that you would not have been able to articulate in October, but that is now simply a fact. You know things. The things your mother knows, the things old Sarah knows, the things that live in the hands and the nose and the particular decision-making muscle that sits somewhere between the eyes and the gut. You know the smell of salt cod that is still good and the smell of salt cod that has gone past saving. You know how long you can keep a piece of dripping before the fat starts to go rancid, about a week in summer, closer to 2 in winter, and you can tell because rancid fat has a sharp metallic smell underneath the usual animal smell. You know which stalls at the end of day market will give you good weight and which ones are padding the scales. You know that the baker on Longacre, despite being somewhat difficult in person, genuinely does not adulterate his flour with chalk or bone meal, which some bakers do, which some bakers are doing all over London at this moment. Because chalk or bone meal is cheaper than flour, and customers can't easily tell the difference, until they've been eating it for a month and their digestion begins to protest. You know which gin shops have food on sale, because gin shops increasingly also sell food, or what they call food, which is sometimes food and sometimes a closer approximation of what food might aspire to be, because the combination of alcohol and something to eat keeps customers longer. The food at gin shops is, with some exceptions, not something you seek out unless hungry enough, but the exceptions exist. A gin shop on Shorts Gardens has a woman who makes the most extraordinary eel pie from eels, taken from the Thames, eels that are neither expensive nor fashionable, but which are, if you know what you're doing, excellent. She knows what she's doing. You went once on a Tuesday afternoon when you had done an errand for Mrs. Hargrove and had a halfpenny left over. The eel pie was the best thing you'd had in weeks. You ate it standing at the counter. The gin shop smelled of smoke and yeast and the particular human warmth of a room that never fully empties. Men at the tables, some drinking, some just sitting in the warmth, because the warmth cost nothing if you'd already bought your penny of gin. A child asleep in the corner under a coat. The woman behind the counter was perhaps 35, with flour on her apron, and the unruffled manner of someone for whom the chaos of the room was simply Tuesday. "Second one?" she asked when you'd finished. You looked at the halfpenny in your hand, the last halfpenny. "No," you said, "but thank you." She gave you a look that was neither pity nor indifference, something in between, something that said, "I see you. I was you. Go well." You went. On a Sunday in March, the sort of Sunday where the light is genuinely warm for the first time since September, you take Tommy to Covent Garden. Not to buy anything. Not to buy anything, you can't afford the morning market, but to look. Tommy has never been. Tommy's world is St. Giles and the streets immediately around it, the church, the school on Thursday afternoons where the charity runs a 2-hour class for children who can show up clean and quiet. He has heard of Covent Garden the way you've heard of places farther away. It exists. It is real. It is not for you. But on a Sunday morning after the market proper, before the theatrical types and the fashionable crowds of the afternoon arrive, Covent Garden is a different place, open, windy. The stalls being cleared, the unsold goods already on their way to other uses, the cobblestones wet from the morning and glinting in the March sunlight. Tommy holds your hand. He's looking at everything with the specific attention of someone who is storing images for later. "Is this where Mum comes?" he asks. "No, Mum goes to Drury Lane and the smaller markets. The prices here are higher. But the food looks better." You look at the remaining displays, the late vendors, the careful arrangements of things that didn't sell in the morning rush. Some of it is better, you say. Some of it is the same food, the same fish. Just here, it was fresh this morning. It's been handled more carefully. It costs more. Why does it cost more if it's the same? You think about how to answer this. It is a question that has a long answer and a short answer. And the long answer is about all the systems that determine who eats what in London and why. And the short answer is simpler. Because the people who shop here can afford for it to cost more, you say. And because they're buying the feeling of quality, not just the food, the way the things are arranged, the feeling of being the kind of person who buys at Covent Garden. Tommy considers this. "We could arrange our food better," he says. "Make it look better." You look at him. He's completely serious. And he is, you realise, completely right. The way your mother arranges the shelf, the bread on the higher shelf, the pots in a row, everything in its place. This is already a version of that. Not for customers, for the family, for the feeling of order in a place where everything outside the door is chaos. You climb, on impulse, the stone steps of the church at the north side of the piazza, not into the church, just onto the steps, because the steps are elevated and open, and the view from them is one of the better views available to you at no cost. From here you can see Covent Garden spread out below you and beyond it. To the southeast, the rooftops and steeples of the city proper, the smoke rising in the Sunday morning air, and somewhere beyond that, the river, which you can sense rather than see, a slight dampness in the air, a smell of tidal mud carried on the March wind. 500,000 people live between you and that smell, all of them eating, all of them, at this moment, making their calculations about what is available and what it costs and what can be done with what is left. The city feeds itself, somehow, imperfectly, painfully, with waste and ingenuity and desperation and creativity, and the specific intelligence of people who cannot afford to stop learning. You stand on the church steps with Tommy beside you, and you look out over London, and you feel, not contentment exactly, not happiness exactly, but something like understanding, a sense of the shape of the thing. This is the city. This is how it works. This is where you live. Can we go back? Tommy says. Ma will have breakfast ready. Yes, you say. Let's go back. Old Sarah died in January of the following year. Not from anything dramatic, just winter and age and the accumulated weight of 60-something years of St. Giles. She went to bed one night and didn't wake up, which her family agrees was the best possible way for it to happen, and which your mother, when she heard, simply nodded at and said, "She would have wanted it like that." Before she went, she told you a few more things that you've been adding to your list ever since. She told you the most dangerous food is the food that doesn't smell bad. The food that smells bad is warning you. Some of the most dangerous things in a kitchen are the things that seem fine. She meant milk that has curdled is obvious. You know to be careful. Milk that looks and smells normal but has sat too long in warm weather can make you sicker faster. She told you cooking is not just heat. Cooking is transformation. You're not heating food. You're changing it into something else. The thing you put in the pot and the thing you take out are not the same substance. She told you always save the fat. Always save the bones. The fat and the bones are where the life is. And last, in October, 2 months before she died, when she gave you a small pot of dripping and a recipe for potted pork that she'd been making for 40 years, and that she wrote out laboriously on a piece of paper that she had to ask her grandson to read back to her, because she couldn't read it herself. The poor will always know how to cook better than the rich, because we cannot afford to waste, and waste is where most people lose. You can cook 3 things from what a wealthy cook throws away from 1. Remember that. It's not shame, it's knowledge. Carry it. You folded the paper, you put it in the crack behind the hearthstone. With the cloth bag and the coins, you still have it. Summer again. Another summer. The city stinks in July the way it always stinks. The particular aggression of London in heat, the river at low tide smell, the meat that needs to be cooked today or thrown away. You are 16. You've been working 3 days a week now for Mrs. Hargrove on Great Queen Street, doing the work that the scullery maid used to do before the scullery maid left to be married. Not glamorous work, scrubbing pots, fetching water, carrying coal, doing the early morning preparation that nobody above scullery rank wants to do. But you learn things. You learn in Mrs. Hargrove's kitchen what fresh meat looks like every single day, what the standard is that the morning market delivers, what quality means when quality is not a calculation but an assumption. And you learn, by comparison, the extraordinary distance between that kitchen and your mother's kitchen, the distance that is measured not in streets, but in money, which translates into everything: equipment, ingredients, time, the luxury of waste. Mrs. Hargrove has a larder, a proper cool room off the kitchen with stone shelves and a grate that lets in outside air, designed to keep things at a temperature between the kitchen warmth and the outside cold. She has ceramic pots of every size. She has salt by the barrel, not by the scraping. She has vinegar purchased by the jug, not by the inch of a bottle. And still, and here is the thing you notice, the thing that surprises you more than it should, she makes the same calculations, not about survival, but about quality, about value, about waste. She saves the chicken carcasses for stock. She uses the trimmings for pie filling. She sends the kitchen dripping to be collected and used, because even in this kitchen, fat is not wasted. The principles are the same. The margin of error is just much larger. "You're good with the bones," she tells you one morning, watching you break down a carcass for stock. The way you move with confidence, the way you know which joints to press to break the cartilage, the way you drop the whole thing into the cold water without being told. "My mother taught me," you say. Your mother knows her business, she says, not as a compliment exactly, but as a professional observation. One cook recognizing another, across whatever distance of class and circumstance separates them. You accept it as what it is. You're sitting in the window of your room in October, when the light dies early and the air has that particular bite again, the bite that says, "Here we go, another winter, are you ready?" Tommy's below you. You can hear him through the floor, doing something involving what sounds like a stick and a pot, which is either practicing drumming or hitting the pot with a stick for reasons that haven't been explained. Nell is singing to herself, the particular wordless song she makes up, repetitive and sweet. Your mother is in the kitchen. You can hear the fire, the murmur of the pot, the particular sound of old Sarah's doctor's broth, which you made today, which you've been making on your own now for months, which is on the fire now, and will be done before the bells strike 8. You made it from a piece of pork that was 3 days old and smelled interesting, trimmed, soaked, boiled twice, treated with vinegar, onion, bay from the dried bunch you brought back from the market in August. The salt was your own calculation, not as much as Sarah used, but enough. The fire was correct, rolling boil to start, murmur to finish. The kitchen smells like a kitchen, like something being made rather than merely heated, like the accumulation of time and knowledge and everything your mother taught you, and everything old Sarah taught you, and everything you have been learning for as long as you have been old enough to learn. You think about the pork that went into that pot, where it came from, some animal that lived and died somewhere outside this city, salted by someone who knew how to salt, transported, sold, resold, sitting too long in Jensen's cousin's shop off Mercer Street, acquired by your mother for 4p because it was 3 days old and nobody else wanted it, in the hands of a different cook, in a different kitchen with different options. It would have gone into the waste bucket. Too old, too far gone, not worth the trouble. In this kitchen, it is going to feed 5 people. The arithmetic of it, when you sit with it, is something. 4 pennies for the pork, 1 penny for the onion. A scraping of vinegar cost negligible. Enough firewood from the broken chair that your neighbour threw into the court, supplemented with a small amount of coal. Total cost, maybe 7 pennies. Feeds 5 people 1 meal, plus the bones for another meal, plus the leftover liquid for the oats in the morning. This is not nothing. This is not poverty of idea. This is a form of intelligence that most people who have never been hungry will never need, and that most people who are hungry have to learn or go under. You have not gone under. You look out the window. The street below is the street it always is. The mud, the lamplight that barely touches the shadows, the cat that lives in the baker's doorway watching the alley with professional interest. Nell stops singing. Tommy stops drumming. The bells begin to sound somewhere distant, marking the hour. 7 o'clock. The pot will be done by 8. Time to go down and stir it. But first, just this moment, the window, the street, the smell of cooking coming up from below, mixing with the October air coming in through the frame. You have been in this room, more or less, your entire life. 14 years, 16 years. The same window, the same street, the same sounds at 7 in the evening, different only in the small ways that lives change, when they change from inside rather than from outside. You are not the child you were. You will not be the person you are now, in another year, in 10 years, in however many years you are given. This is the nature of time, and you know it without quite putting it in words. It is one of those things that lives in the body rather than the mind, the knowledge that things change, that even the most fixed-seeming things shift under sufficient time. But some things do not change. The smell of onion in a pot, the sound of a fire that has found its rhythm, the weight of a spoon in your hand, the specific resistance of good broth when you stir it. The way your mother looks at the shelves in the morning, doing the count, doing the calculation, her face doing the mathematics that her hands will then do all day. The things she has put into you, without ceremony, without language, without anything that could be called a lesson, but that are in fact the most thorough education you have ever received. How to smell the truth of the thing, how to keep what is worth keeping, how to make enough from not enough, how to use fire and salt and vinegar and patience to turn what is failing into what is food, how to look at what the rest of the world would throw away and see dinner. This is knowledge that has been passing from hand to hand, generation to generation for as long as there have been poor people in cities, which is as long as there have been cities. Every woman who stood over a fire in the slums of Rome, in the narrow alleys of medieval Paris, in the tenements of every city that has ever pressed too many people into too little space. Every one of them knew some version of what your mother knows, what old Sarah knew, what you are learning. It is not written in any book. There is no record of it, no monument, no statue in any public square honouring the women who kept children fed on almost nothing. But it is real. It is knowledge. It is as precise and as practised as anything that happens in the grand kitchens on Great Queen Street. More precise in some ways, because in the grand kitchens there is room for error. Here there is no room for error. Here you get it right, or people go hungry. And you have been getting it right. The pot murmurs below. The fire has found its voice. The low, steady conversation that old Sarah told you to listen for. Not silence, not riot. Just the good working murmur of something doing what it's supposed to do. You will go down in a moment. You will lift the lid and the steam will hit your face warm, and you will smell the pork and the onion and the vinegar and the bay, and underneath all of it, the deep animal smell of something that has been coaxed back from the edge of being useless into being nourishing. You will taste it. Add salt if needed. A drop more vinegar if the richness has gotten ahead of the balance. You have been doing this long enough to know when the balance is right, which is a thing that lives in the tongue and the nose and the memory of every pot that came before this one. You will call the children. Tommy will come in with whatever he's been hitting the pot with, still holding it, setting it down only when your mother tells him to, with the resigned air of a child who's been civilized against his will. Nell will come in with her singing, which will briefly conflict with the eating, but will eventually give way to eating. Because Nell at 5 years old is practical about the things that matter. Your mother will set the bowls. You will ladle the broth. The family will eat. This is what will happen. You know it will happen. You know the shape of this evening so well that you could close your eyes and live it from memory. But it hasn't happened yet. Right now, just for another moment, you are sitting in the window. The street below you is London. Is October 1751. Is the world that is the only world you know, with all its weight and its cold and its persistent grinding difficulty and its small genuine warmth. You're 16 years old, and you know things that most people your age, most people 3 times your age, don't know and won't need to know, and that will not earn you any recognition or reward except the particular reward of having survived, of having contributed, of having learned well the education that your circumstances insisted you receive. You are warm enough, fed enough, here enough. You have a pot on the fire and a family below you and enough knowledge in your hands to make something from almost nothing, which is all anyone in St. Giles can ever really ask for. That's enough. It's enough. Outside, the October evening does what October evenings do, gets darker, gets colder, gets quieter in some ways and noisier in others, as the taverns fill and the legitimate day gives way to the London that operates in the space between lamplight and dawn. But in the room below you, the pot murmurs, and in a moment you'll go down to it, and the evening will happen the way evenings happen. Bread, broth, the children, your mother's hands, the fire, the counting down of the day into sleep. And tomorrow morning your mother will be up before you. She will be calculating already what needs to be done, what needs to be found, what is on the shelf and what isn't, and what she'll do about it. She will have already started the working out of tomorrow's food from whatever today leaves behind. She will have the pot on the fire before you come downstairs. She always does. And here is what I want you to hold before sleep takes you. Not the hunger, not the cold, not the particular difficulty of a life that asks so much and offers so little margin for error. What I want you to hold is the knowledge that lives in hands and noses and the careful, practiced attention of people who cannot afford to stop paying attention. The knowledge that transforms bones into nourishment and old meat into medicine, and the scraps of other people's tables into the sustenance of lives that the people at those tables will never see. This knowledge is centuries old. It is older than any of the grand buildings in London, older than the stone piers of the bridges, older than the churches with their famous bells. It will still be old when this city has changed past recognition, when the streets are paved and lit by means that would seem impossible in 1751, when the river is tamed and the plague and the hunger and the gin epidemic are history that people study rather than survive. The knowledge will still be there, in the hands of whoever needs it, in the daughters of the daughters of the daughters of women like your mother, passed on without ceremony, without record, without any monument at all, just the right amount of salt, the vinegar, the first cold water, then the heat, the long patient boil that takes what looks like nothing and makes it finally into something. Let the city outside go dark. Let the bells mark whatever hour this is. Let your eyes close, and the sounds of St. Giles, the tavern noise, and the distant church, and the cats on the roof line, and the fire in the room below you, let them all blur together into the particular sound of a place that is alive, that is always alive, that never quite stops. You have enough for tonight. Tomorrow there will be the market again, and the calculations again, and the decisions again, and all the ordinary, extraordinary work of feeding a family on the thin edge between enough and not enough. But tomorrow is tomorrow. Tonight the broth is ready. Tonight you're warm. Tonight is enough. Let sleep come. Let it come the way it always comes to people who have worked hard with their hands and their minds and their knowledge, deeply, finally, with the particular heaviness of a body that has earned its rest. The pot murmurs, the fire breathes. Somewhere in the dark of the city a bell strikes an hour, and the sound rolls out across the rooftops of London and over the sleeping children and the women still awake at their calculations, and the bones still giving up their last richness to the water, and the cold October air coming in through all the cracked and imperfect windows of all the imperfect, stubborn, enduring rooms where people are getting through another night. Getting through. Carrying what they know. Making enough from... Not enough. Still here. Good night.